I had 10 minutes before the locks changed, and my life ended on a Chicago sidewalk. My hands shook just enough to lose grip on the ultrasound photo as I shoved it into my coat pocket. The glossy paper felt slick with snowmelt, like it might dissolve before I could prove to anyone that this baby was real. Around me, the luxury high-rise hummed with the low frequency of old money, the pneumatic hiss of closing elevator doors, muted K-dramas filtering through soundproofed walls, the whisper of cashmere against imported marble. Outside, the blizzard howled against floor-to-ceiling windows, turning Michigan Avenue into a white void. But in here, behind Ji-hoon's mahogany door, everything was warm. Too warm, suffocating. I stood in his entryway like I was standing at the edge of my own grave. Ji-hoon sat on the leather sectional with his back to the snowstorm, the city disappearing behind him into a wall of white static. He looked like he'd been carved from ice, sharp jawline set in disgust, black hair perfectly styled even at this hour, a Burberry sweater expensive enough to cover 3 months of the rent he was taking from me. His mother's voice crackled through his phone on speaker, Korean syllables I'd never been allowed to understand. Each one, another nail in my coffin. "You have 7 minutes now, Irma." He didn't look at me. His eyes stayed fixed on the ultrasound photo I'd shown him an hour ago. The one he'd already decided meant nothing. "My mother wants a Korean bride, not a liability. Not," he gestured at my swollen belly with the kind of revulsion people reserve for roadkill. The suitcase in my hand suddenly weighed 1,000 pounds. I was 7 months pregnant, shivering in a coat too thin for survival, watching the man I'd loved reduce me to a problem that could be solved with a deadbolt and 10 minutes of cruelty. When the door slammed, the sound echoed through the hallway like a death sentence. Before we begin, click subscribe, like this video, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more thrilling stories, and trust me, you won't want me to miss them. Now let's get into the story. The cold hit me like a fist, not the gentle kind of cold you brace for. This was the kind that stopped your lungs mid-breath, that turned your tears to ice before they could fall. The blizzard had transformed Chicago into a white hell, and I was invisible in it. A pregnant black woman with a suitcase, erased by snow. I made it half a block before my legs gave out. The sidewalk came up fast, concrete hidden under 6 inches of powder that might as well have been 6 feet of water. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The contractions started as a whisper in my lower back, then became a scream. Not labor, not yet, but a warning. "You're killing us both." My fingers clawed at the snow, searching for something solid, but there was nothing. Just white, just cold, just the certainty that I was going to die here, 20 feet from the building where I'd made breakfast this morning. The headlights cut through the white like judgment. A black Rolls-Royce Ghost materialized from the storm, so out of place in this apocalypse it might as well have been a hearse. The car stopped 10 feet away, idling like a predator, deciding whether I was worth the effort. I tried to lift my head, tried to wave, tried to do anything that might signal I was still alive. The door opened, and the interior light spilled onto the snow like liquid gold. The man who stepped out didn't look like a savior. He looked like a reckoning. Brian Henley moved through the blizzard like it didn't exist, an umbrella in one hand, and something dark and unreadable in his eyes. He was tall enough to block out the streetlight, broad enough to make the storm seem small. The newspapers called him the King of Coals, a fossil fuel baron with ties to every dark corner of the Pacific Rim. I'd seen his face on the business section once, above a headline about a hostile takeover that left 12 executives jobless and 1 in witness protection. He crouched beside me, and I could smell expensive leather and something else. Smoke. Gunpowder. Power. He made a mistake. His voice was a low, gravelly rumble that somehow cut through the wind. Not a question. A statement. His eyes scanned my shivering frame, my pregnant belly, the suitcase that had fallen. Open in the snow, spilling my entire life into the gutter. Bras. Maternity jeans. A baby book with corners softened by hope. He threw away a diamond, thinking it was glass. I tried to speak, but my teeth were chattering too hard. Tried to ask who he was, how he knew, why he was here in the middle of a blizzard at 2 in the morning. But my tongue was frozen, my thoughts scattered like the snow. Come. He didn't wait for permission. His arm slid under my shoulders, the other beneath my knees, lifting me like I weighed nothing. Suddenly, I was being carried through the blizzard, toward the warmth of that black car, and some animal part of my brain screamed that this was wrong, that women who got into cars with strange men didn't come back, that rescue and abduction wore the same face in the dark. But I was so cold, and he was so warm. The leather interior smelled like money and danger. The heat burned against my frozen skin, painful and necessary. He set me down gently, then reached across to buckle my seatbelt, his face inches from mine. Up close, I could see the scar that ran along his jawline, the gray threading through his dark hair at the temples, the way his eyes lingered on my belly with something that looked almost like rage. "Who are you?" I finally managed, my voice a cracked whisper. He closed the door without answering. Through the tinted window, I watched him gather my suitcase, shake off the snow, place it in the trunk with the same care someone might handle evidence. When he slid into the driver's seat, the car purred to life, and the blizzard became a distant roar. Someone who's been waiting for Park Ji-hoon to make exactly this kind of mistake. His eyes found mine in the rearview mirror. Cold, calculating, already working through a problem I didn't yet understand. "You just became very valuable, Irma Lopez." He knew my name. The car pulled away from the curb, and I watched Ji-hoon's building disappear into the white. I didn't know I'd just been traded from a petty coward to a powerful king. I didn't know that by morning, my ex-boyfriend's empire would begin to burn. I only knew I was warm, and that terrified me more than the cold ever could. I woke up drowning in white. Not snow this time. Egyptian cotton sheets with a thread count higher than my credit score. A duvet so light it felt like sleeping under clouds. For one blissful second, I thought I'd died in the blizzard, and this was whatever came after. Then the baby kicked, sharp and insistent against my ribs, and reality crashed back in. This wasn't heaven. I didn't know what it was. The room stretched out like something from an architecture magazine. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. Walls of pale marble veined with gold. Furniture that looked like it cost more than my car. Everything was glass and chrome and angles sharp enough to cut. A prison designed by someone who understood that beauty could be just as effective as bars. I sat up slowly, my body aching in places I didn't know could ache. Someone had changed my clothes. I was wearing silk pajamas the color of champagne, my wet things gone, my suitcase sitting at the foot of the bed like it had always belonged here. The thought of strange hands undressing me while I was unconscious made my skin crawl. The door opened without a knock. A woman entered carrying a silver tray, her movements efficient and cold. She was maybe 60, Korean, dressed in black with her gray hair pulled into a severe bun. She set the tray on the nightstand. Tea, toast, a small bowl of cut fruit arranged like art, and finally looked at me with eyes that held no warmth whatsoever. "Mr. Henley requests your presence in the East Wing when you're able." Her English was perfect, her accent precise. "The doctor examined you last night. You and the baby are stable, but you need rest and nutrition. I'm Mrs. Choi. I manage the household." "Where am I?" My voice came out rough, damaged by the cold. "Lake Shore Drive. The penthouse." She moved to the windows and pressed something on the wall. Blackout shades began to rise, revealing the city far below, still buried in snow. "You're safe here. Mr. Henley ensures that." Safe. The word tasted wrong in my mouth. I wanted to ask more, but she was already leaving, her footsteps silent on the heated marble floors. The door closed with the soft click of expensive hardware, and I was alone again with my terror and my questions. I forced myself out of bed, my legs shaky but functional. The bathroom was obscene, a rain shower big enough for 4 people, a soaking tub carved from a single piece of stone, toiletries that probably cost more per ounce than gold. I caught my reflection in the mirror and barely recognized myself. My braids were a mess, my eyes hollowed out by exhaustion and fear, my belly swollen and vulnerable under the silk. I looked like a kept woman, a prisoner with expensive amenities. When I finally emerged, dressed in the clothes someone had left folded on the bed, maternity jeans that fit perfectly, a cashmere sweater in deep burgundy, I followed the sound of voices down a hallway that felt like it went on forever. The East Wing opened into an office that belonged in a Bond villain's lair. One wall was entirely glass, overlooking the frozen lake. The others were lined with books and screens showing stock tickers, security feeds, what looked like satellite imagery. And there, behind a desk of black walnut, sat Brian Henley. He looked different in daylight, more dangerous. The newspaper on his desk showed his face above the fold, and I finally read the headline I'd been too cold to process before. Devil of the West Side expands empire. Henley Syndicate acquires 3 more properties in hostile takeover. Syndicate. Not corporation. Syndicate. "You're awake." He set down his phone and gestured to the chair across from him. "Good. We have a lot to discuss, Irma. Starting with why Park Ji-hoon sold your identity to the Jade Serpent Triad to cover his gambling debts." The room tilted. I gripped the doorframe to keep from falling. "What?" His smile was sharp enough to draw blood. "Sit down, Mrs. Lopez. Let me tell you exactly how valuable you've become." I didn't sit. I couldn't. My legs had turned to water, but some stubborn part of me refused to collapse in front of this man twice in 12 hours. Brian watched me with the patience of a predator who knew his prey had nowhere to run. "I don't understand." My hand moved instinctively to my belly, protecting what I could. Ji-hoon wouldn't. Wouldn't what? Steal from you? He opened a folder on his desk and turned it toward me. He's been using your social security number for 6 months. Credit cards in your name. Bank accounts. A shell company registered to your address that funnels money from his family's real estate deals into the Jade Serpent's operations. The document swam in my vision. My name. My signature. Except I'd never signed anything like this. That's not possible. I would have known. I check my credit. You check the accounts he let you see. Brian's voice was clinical, almost gentle, like a doctor delivering a terminal diagnosis. He had your mail rerouted. Your credit monitoring alerts sent to an email address you don't control. You've been drowning in debt for months, Irma. You just didn't know you were underwater. He slid another paper across the desk. A credit report with my name at the top and a number so deep in the red, it might as well have been written in blood. $73,000. Collections agencies. Judgments. My credit score had been murdered and buried while I was cooking dinner and rubbing Ji-hoon's feet and planning a nursery for a baby he never intended to claim. Why? The word came out broken. Why would he do this? Because he's weak, and weak men make desperate choices. Brian stood, moving around the desk with the fluid grace of someone who'd never been afraid a day in his life. The Jade Serpent runs most of the gambling operations on the south side. Ji-hoon racked up debts, playing high-stakes poker in their underground rooms. When they came to collect, he didn't have the cash, so he offered them something better. Access to his family's real estate empire through a clean American identity that couldn't be traced back to them. Mine. Yours. He stopped in front of me, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes. They're using you to launder money, to purchase properties, to build an empire on your credit while you take all the legal risk. When the feds come knocking, and they will, it's your door they'll break down. Your name on the indictments. Your baby born in a cell, while Ji-hoon's family walks away clean. The room spun. I grabbed the edge of his desk, my knuckles white against the dark wood. I'll go to the police. I'll tell them. Tell them what? That your boyfriend stole your identity? They'll investigate. Maybe in 6 months they'll file charges. Maybe in a year, you'll get your day in court. His hand came up, not touching me, just hovering near my shoulder like he was deciding whether I was worth catching. The Jade Serpent doesn't wait for due process, Irma. They'll have you disappeared long before any trial. You and the liability growing inside you. I should have been terrified. I was terrified. But underneath the fear was something hotter, something that tasted like gasoline and matched. Then what do you want from me? His smile returned, slow and dangerous. I want to give you what Ji-hoon took. Your name, your dignity, your future. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. And in exchange, I want to watch his entire world burn. He opened the box. Inside sat a diamond ring so large, it looked obscene. Marry me, Irma. Become Mrs. Henley. Let me make you untouchable. The baby kicked again, hard enough to steal my breath. Outside, the blizzard had stopped, and the sun was rising over the frozen lake, turning everything to gold and ice. I looked at the ring, at Brian, at the documents that proved I was already ruined. What happens to Ji-hoon? Brian's eyes went cold. Everything he fears and worse. I reached for the ring. His hand closed over mine before I could touch the velvet. Not yet. You need to understand what you're agreeing to. He set the box on the desk between us, the diamond catching the morning light like a tiny sun. This isn't a fairy tale, Irma. I'm not rescuing you out of the goodness of my heart. Then why? I pulled my hand back, wrapping my arms around my belly. Why me? Why now? Because Ji-hoon made you the perfect weapon. He circled back to his chair, gesturing for me to sit. This time I did. My legs couldn't hold me anymore. That shell company in your name. It's connected to 6 of the Jade Serpent's money laundering operations, which means you have legal standing to testify, to turn state's evidence, to burn their entire network to the ground. But only if you're protected, only if you're mine. The word hung in the air like smoke. Mine. You want me to testify against them. Eventually. First, I want to marry you. Legally. Publicly, loudly enough that every syndicate from here to Hong Kong knows that Irma Lopez is now Irma Henley, and that touching you means going to war with me. He leaned forward, his elbows on the desk, his eyes locked on mine with an intensity that made my skin burn. Your baby will be born with my name, with my protection, with citizenship to countries that don't extradite. No one will ever throw you into a blizzard again. And what do you get? Revenge. The word was almost gentle. Ji-hoon's family has been moving into territories I control, buying properties, bribing officials, using Jade Serpent muscle to push out my operations. They think they're untouchable because they've kept their hands clean. hidden behind American proxies and offshore accounts. But you? His smile was a blade. You're the thread I pull to unravel everything. I should have said no. Should have run. Should have taken my chances with the police or witness protection or just disappearing into another state with my baby and whatever dignity I had left. But the credit report was still sitting on the desk, my name destroyed, my future already stolen. And Brian was offering me something no one else could. Power. What are the terms? My voice was steady, stronger than I felt. You marry me tomorrow. Civil ceremony. Minimal witnesses. We'll have a larger reception later when you're recovered. Something public enough to make the society pages. You live here, under my protection, until after the baby is born. After that, if you want to leave, I'll set you up anywhere in the world with enough money to start over. No strings. But while you're here, you're my wife, in every way that matters legally. And physically? The question came out quieter than I intended. His expression softened, just barely. I'm not Ji-hoon, Irma. I don't take what isn't freely given. You'll have your own wing, your own space. This marriage is a contract, not a cage. He paused, his jaw tightening. But when we're in public, you'll play the part. The devoted wife, the woman who chose me over him. I want to see their faces when they realize who you belong to now. Belong, that word again. And if I say no, then I'll put you on a plane to wherever you want to go. And you'll spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, waiting for the Jade Serpent to collect on Ji-hoon's debt. He stood, walking to the window, his back to me. I'm offering you a choice, Irma. Die slowly as a victim, or live dangerously as a queen. The baby kicked. The sun climbed higher. Chicago stretched out below us, glittering and merciless. I picked up the ring box. The weight of it was surprising, solid and real and terrifying. I have one condition. Brian turned, his eyebrow raised. When this is over, when Ji-hoon and his family are destroyed, I want to be there. I want to watch. His smile could have lit the city on fire. Mrs. Henley, I wouldn't dream of denying you that pleasure. I slipped the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly. Of course it did. Then let's get married. The transformation began before the ink dried on the marriage license. Mrs. Choi appeared at my door at 7 the next morning, with an army behind her. Stylists, personal shoppers, a tailor who measured me with the precision of a surgeon, a jeweler who laid out trays of diamonds like they were candy. They descended on me with the efficiency of a military operation, and I understood that this wasn't kindness. This was strategy. Brian was building a weapon, and I was the blade he intended to sharpen. The first thing to go was my hair. The stylist, a French woman named Dominique with cheekbones that could cut glass, TSKED over my braids like they were a personal insult. We keep the texture, yes? But we elevate. We make them see power when they look at you. 3 hours later, my natural curls were shaped into an elegant crown, edges sleek, each coil defined and glistening. I looked like royalty. I looked like someone Ji-hoon would never have been brave enough to bring home to his mother. The clothes came next, not the safe, modest pieces I'd worn to make myself smaller in Ji-hoon's world. These were statements. A Valentino maternity dress in blood red. A Burberry coat. The same brand Ji-hoon wore, but mine was cashmere-lined and cost twice as much. Tom Ford. Gucci. Brands I'd only seen in magazines, now hanging in a closet the size of my old apartment. The tailor pinned and adjusted, making sure every piece emphasized rather than hid my pregnant belly. You will not apologize for taking up space, Dominique said, her hands on my shoulders as I stared at myself in the mirror. You will walk into rooms like you own them, because now, Cherie, you do. The jewelry was obscene, not just the engagement ring that weighed down my left hand, but diamond studs that could pay off a mortgage. A Cartier watch, pearl necklaces, a bracelet of black diamonds that Brian himself clasped around my wrist that evening, his fingers lingering on my pulse point. Everything Ji-hoon gave you was borrowed, conditional, a leash disguised as a gift. His voice was low, intimate, his breath warm against my ear. Everything I give you is yours. No matter what happens between us, you keep it all. The clothes, the jewelry, the accounts I'm opening in your name. Real accounts this time, with real money. Money he can't touch. Money the Jade Serpent can't seize. I watched him in the mirror, this man who'd turned me from a woman dying in the snow into something that glittered and cut. Why so much? Because when you walk into that gala next week, I want Ji-hoon to choke on his regret. His hands moved to my shoulders, possessive and grounding. I want his mother to see what a real prize looks like. I want every person in that room to know that he threw away a diamond for fool's gold, and that diamond is mine now. There was that word again. Mine. But this time it didn't make me feel trapped. It made me feel dangerous. The final touch came 3 days before the gala. A makeup artist who made my brown skin glow like it had been dipped in gold. a manicurist who painted my nails the same blood red as my dress, and then Brian himself, appearing with a final gift. A legal document, my credit, restored, my name, cleared, every fraudulent account closed, every debt erased as if Ji-hoon had never touched me. He stole your past, Brian said, watching me read through the pages with tears streaming down my carefully made-up face. I'm giving you back your future. Now let's go take his. I looked at myself one last time. The woman in the mirror wasn't Irma Lopez, the girl who'd been thrown away. She was Irma Henley, the wife of the Devil of the West Side, dressed in armor made of silk and diamonds. I was ready for war. The first shot fired at 3 a.m, 2 days before the gala. I woke to voices in the hallway, urgent and low. Brian's door, across from mine in the East Wing, stood open, light spilling out like a wound. I pulled on a robe and found him at his desk, still dressed in the suit he'd worn to dinner, surrounded by men in black who looked like they'd stepped out of a crime thriller. Maps spread across every surface, property deeds, legal documents stamped with official seals. The Park family's holdings on the south side, one of them was saying, pointing to red circles on a map of Chicago. 4 apartment complexes, 2 commercial properties, and the restaurant where they host their private meetings. We have the leverage to force sales on 3 of them by Monday. Brian saw me in the doorway and gestured me inside. You should see this. It's yours as much as mine. I moved closer, my heart hammering. The properties marked in red were Ji-hoon's inheritance, the empire his mother had built from nothing and protected like a dragon guarding gold. How? The shell company in your name? The one Ji-hoon used to funnel money? It has liens on half of these properties, legal claims that make their ownership disputed. Brian's smile was surgical. My lawyers filed the paperwork this afternoon. By sunrise, the Park family will wake up to find their assets frozen and their empire in foreclosure. It was elegant, brutal. Ji-hoon had used my name to build his family's fortune, and now that same name would tear it all down. What about the Jade Serpent? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. They'll cut their losses. The triad doesn't protect sinking ships. Brian stood, dismissing his men with a nod. They filed out silently, leaving us alone with the maps and the destruction they represented. By the time they realize what's happening, Ji-hoon will be too radioactive to touch. Just another desperate gambler who couldn't pay his debts. My phone buzzed. I'd almost forgotten I still had it. The same cracked iPhone that had survived the blizzard. The screen lit up with a name that made my blood freeze. Ji-hoon. I stared at it, my thumb hovering over the decline button. It buzzed again. Again. Desperate and insistent, the way he'd never been when I needed him. Brian plucked the phone from my hand. May I? I nodded, unable to speak. He answered on the 4th ring, his voice casual, almost bored. Ji-hoon. I was wondering when you'd call. I couldn't hear the other end, but I could imagine it. The panic, the confusion, the slowly dawning horror. Irma? Brian glanced at me, his eyes glinting with dark amusement. She's unavailable at the moment. She's my wife now, you see. Has been for 3 days. Beautiful ceremony. You should have been there, but I understand you were busy evicting her into a blizzard. The silence on the other end must have been deafening. Oh, you didn't know? Brian's voice dropped, each word a knife between the ribs. Yes, she survived. Thrived, actually. You're calling her old number, but Mrs. Henley doesn't need that phone anymore. She has everything she needs here. Security, protection, a husband who knows her value. He paused, listening, and his smile turned feral. Your properties. Consider them a wedding gift. She's owed at least that much for the identity theft, don't you think? My lawyers estimate you used her name to secure about $4 million in fraudulent transactions. I'm simply collecting what's hers. Another pause. No, you can't speak to her. She's done speaking to men who throw pregnant women into snowstorms. But she'll see you at the gala on Saturday. Front row. I'm told your mother secured quite the table. He ended the call and handed me back the phone. He's crying. Good. The word tried to climb out of my throat, but I swallowed it down. I wasn't supposed to feel this satisfaction, this dark joy at another person's suffering. But Ji-hoon had thrown away my humanity like it was garbage. Turnabout felt like justice. What happens now? I asked. Brian pulled me close, his hand protective over my belly, his lips against my temple. Now we get dressed for war. The gala is in 48 hours. By then, he'll have lost everything but his pride. And we're gonna take that too. They came for me at the medical clinic, because of course they did. Brian had insisted on the appointment. A routine checkup with an obstetrician whose office occupied the entire top floor of a building overlooking Millennium Park. Dr. Sarah Chen was everything Ji-hoon's discount clinic wasn't. Attentive, thorough, treating me like a person instead of a problem. The ultrasound showed my daughter, perfect and whole, her heartbeat strong enough to make me cry. I was still wiping my eyes when I walked into the waiting room and saw her. Ji-hoon's mother sat like a queen on a throne, dressed in Chanel and cold fury, flanked by two men in suits that screamed hired muscle. Mrs. Park had aged since I'd last seen her 6 months ago, new lines carved around her mouth, gray threading through her severe bob. She stood when she saw me, her eyes traveling from my face to my belly to the rings glittering on my finger, and her expression curdled into something ugly. You! The word was venom in English, followed by a stream of Korean I didn't need to understand to know was worse. She moved toward me, and the security guard Brian had insisted accompany me. Marcus, 6'4" of silent intimidation, stepped between us. Mrs. Park. I kept my voice level, channeling every ounce of the woman Brian had spent a week building. This is a private medical facility. You should leave. Private? She laughed, sharp and bitter. You stole my son's properties, his inheritance. Everything I built, you took with your lies and your... She spat another Korean word that made the receptionist gasp. I took what was mine. The words came out stronger than I felt. Your son used my identity to commit fraud. My husband is simply collecting the debt. Your husband, Mrs. Park's face twisted. That gangster. That thug. You think marrying a criminal makes you untouchable? You think his dirty money can protect you from... She didn't finish. The elevator doors opened, and Brian stepped out flanked by 4 men in black tactical gear. Not suits. Gear. The kind that said we're not here to talk, we're here to end conversations. The waiting room went silent. Brian crossed to me in 3 strides, his hand finding the small of my back, his eyes never leaving Mrs. Park. I got your text. He'd taught me the code. If I felt unsafe, 1 word would bring him running. I hadn't expected an army. Mr. Henley. Mrs. Park drew herself up, trying to reclaim authority in a room that no longer belonged to her. This is between my family and this woman. It doesn't concern. Everything concerning my wife concerns me. His voice was quiet, conversational, and somehow more terrifying than if he'd shouted. You followed her to a medical appointment. You brought hired intimidation to a place where pregnant women seek care. You threatened the mother of my child. He stepped forward, and Mrs. Park actually flinched. That concerns me very much. One of his men handed him a tablet. Brian glanced at it, then turned it toward Mrs. Park. This is footage from the clinic's security cameras. You, making threats. Your associates, blocking exits. I'm sending this to my lawyers. And the police. By tonight, you'll have a restraining order. By tomorrow, you'll be explaining to immigration why you violated the terms of your visa. You can't. I can. I will. And if you, or anyone in your family, comes within 100 yards of Irma again, I'll do worse than take your properties. I'll make sure your son answers for every fraudulent transaction, every forged signature, every penny he stole using her name. He'll be in federal prison before your next birthday. Mrs. Park's facade cracked. For a moment, she looked small, desperate, a mother watching her empire crumble. Then her eyes hardened, and she looked at me with pure hatred. You were nothing, a nobody. He should have left you in the snow. Brian's hand tightened on my waist, but I spoke before he could. He did, and your nobody is about to take everything you have. See you at the gala, Mrs. Park. Front row. Security escorted her out. She didn't look back. In the elevator down, Brian pulled me against his chest, and I finally let myself shake. You came, always. His lips brushed my hair. You're mine to protect now. They'll learn that, or they'll learn what happens when they forget. The city spread out below us, glittering and brutal and mine. I was untouchable, and it felt like power. The grand ballroom of the Drake Hotel glittered like the inside of a jewelry box. All crystal chandeliers and gilded molding, and Chicago's elite dripping in wealth they'd inherited or stolen or both. I walked in on Brian's arm wearing the blood-red Valentino, my baby bump, a declaration of war, diamonds at my throat that cost more than Ji-hoon's car. Every head turned. Every conversation stopped. The pregnant black woman who'd been thrown into a blizzard had returned as the devil's bride, and the room didn't know whether to bow or run. I found Ji-hoon immediately. You always know where your ghosts are standing. He looked like he'd aged a decade in 2 weeks. His Tom Ford suit hung loose on a frame that had lost weight, his eyes shadowed and desperate. He sat at his family's table near the front, his mother rigid beside him, both of them staring at me like I was a bomb about to detonate. They weren't wrong. Brian led me to our table, center of the room, positioned like a throne. The city's power brokers surrounded us. Politicians and CEOs and old money that smelled like private schools and offshore accounts. They greeted Brian with cautious respect, and me with curiosity barely concealed as pity. Poor thing, their eyes said. She doesn't know what she's married into. I smiled like I knew exactly what I'd married into, and liked it. The evening crawled through speeches and silent auctions and salmon that probably cost more than my old rent. I caught Ji-hoon watching me 3 times, his expressions cycling through disbelief, rage, and something that might have been regret. Mrs. Park wouldn't look at me at all, her attention fixed on her plate like it contained answers to prayers that wouldn't be answered. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. The charity's president took the stage, a silver-haired woman in pearls who commanded attention like a general. She thanked donors, announced totals, and then smiled with the kind of warmth that precedes a public execution. And now, we have a special presentation from one of our newest benefactors. Mrs. Irma Henley, would you join me? The room erupted in polite applause. Brian squeezed my hand, then released me. I walked to the stage alone, my heels clicking on marble, my heart a war drum in my chest. The microphone felt like a weapon when I gripped it. Thank you for that warm welcome, I began, my voice steady and clear. I'm here tonight because this charity supports victims of financial fraud, an issue close to my heart since I was a victim myself. I paused, letting the words settle. 6 months ago, my identity was stolen by someone I trusted. Someone who used my name, my credit, my entire life to launder money for organized crime. He racked up $73,000 in fraudulent debt, destroyed my credit score, and then threw me out of his home when I became inconvenient. When I was 7 months pregnant. In a blizzard, the room had gone silent. Every eye was on me. I found Ji-hoon in the crowd, watched the color drain from his face. That person was Park Ji-hoon. I gestured toward him, and head swiveled like a wave. The same Ji-hoon, whose family is hosting Table 12 tonight. The same Ji-hoon, who used shell companies in my name to funnel money to the Jade Serpent Triad. The same Ji-hoon, who committed identity theft, wire fraud, and conspiracy to launder money. Mrs. Park stood, fury contorting her features. This is slander. You have no proof. I have all the proof. Brian's voice cut through her protest. He stood at our table, holding up a folder. Bank records, forged signatures, testimony from the Triad members who've already turned state's evidence in exchange for reduced sentences. The FBI has been investigating the Park family's operations for 6 months. They were just waiting for the right catalyst. On cue, the ballroom doors opened. Federal agents and windbreakers poured in, badges gleaming. Ji-hoon ran. He actually ran, knocking over chairs in his desperation to reach the kitchen exit. He made it 10 feet before 2 agents tackled him to the marble floor. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut was the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard. Mrs. Park was next, her protest shrill and useless as they read her rights in English and Korean. The ballroom erupted into chaos, society's elite fleeing like rats from a sinking ship, desperate to distance themselves from the scandal unfolding in real time. I walked back to Brian through the wreckage, and he pulled me into his arms, his lips against my temple. How do you feel? I watched Ji-hoon being dragged past our table, his eyes meeting mine one last time, empty, defeated, erased, like a queen. The cameras flashed. Tomorrow's headlines would call it the scandal of the decade. But tonight, it was just justice served cold in a ballroom full of witnesses. I'd stopped being a victim the moment I put on that ring. Now I was something else entirely. Spring came to Chicago like an apology, thawing the city that had tried to kill me. The ice melted from the streets, revealing pavement I'd bled on, sidewalks where I'd collapsed. But I wasn't there to see it happen. I was 30 floors above the world, in a private hospital suite that cost more per night than most people's mortgages, bringing my daughter into a world that would never dare tell her no. She arrived at dawn on the first day of May, screaming like she owned the place. 8 pounds, 6 ounces of fury and perfection, with my dark skin and a head full of black curls that would probably never behave. I named her Nadia, hope in Slavic, a gift in Arabic, because that's what she was. Proof that I'd survived, that I'd won. Brian held her like she was made of glass and starlight, this man who'd built empires on broken backs and blood money, reduced to tears by 7 pounds of baby girl. She's perfect, he whispered, his voice cracked and raw. You're both perfect. I wanted to tell him it wasn't real, that our marriage was still just a contract with an expiration date. But watching him cradle my daughter, whispering promises in her tiny ear about ponies and trust funds, and anyone who hurt her disappearing into the lake, I wasn't sure anymore where the performance ended and the truth began. 2 weeks later, I stood in the penthouse of Ji-hoon's old building, with Nadia asleep against my chest in a silk wrap that cost more than my old car. Brian had bought it 3 days after the gala. The whole building, 42 units of luxury real estate that the Park family had built their empire on, sold at auction for pennies on the dollar when the federal asset seizure went through. He'd had my name put on the deed. Not his, mine. So you never forget, he'd said, handing me the keys. You were thrown out of here like garbage. Now you own every brick, every window, every lock that was used to keep you out. I walked through Ji-hoon's old apartment, my apartment now, with Nadia warm against my heart. Someone had cleared out his things, erased every trace of him like he'd never existed. The mahogany door that had slammed in my face stood open, welcoming. The leather sectional where he'd sat in judgment was gone, replaced with furniture I'd chosen, soft and warm and mine. I stopped at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Michigan Avenue, the same windows where the blizzard had raged, where I'd become invisible. The city stretched out below me, spring green and glittering, and I could see everything. The Drake Hotel where Ji-hoon had been arrested, the clinic where Mrs. Park had learned I was untouchable, the corner where Brian's Rolls-Royce had stopped and changed my life. Nadia stirred against me, making the small sounds babies make when they're dreaming. I wondered what she was seeing behind those closed eyes. I hoped it was warmth, safety, a world where no one would ever throw her into the cold. Your mother was weak once, I told her, my reflection in the glass showing a woman I barely recognized. Designer clothes, diamond rings, a baby born into wealth and protection. She let people make her small. But then she learned something important. I kissed her forehead, breathing in that new baby smell that was better than any perfume. She learned that the best revenge isn't destruction. It's rising so high that the people who hurt you become ants beneath your feet. Behind me, Brian appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame like he belonged there. Like we both did. How does it feel? He asked. Being back here. I looked out at the city one more time, at the empire we'd built on the ashes of the people who'd tried to burn me. Ji-hoon was in federal prison, awaiting trial. His mother had fled to Seoul, broke and disgraced. The Jade Serpent Triad had been dismantled, their operations absorbed into Brian's legitimate businesses. And I stood in the home I'd been thrown out of, holding my daughter, wearing a wedding ring that had started as strategy but felt increasingly like truth. It feels like winning, I said. Brian crossed the room and wrapped his arms around us both, his chin resting on my head, his warmth solid and real. Good, because this is just the beginning, Mrs. Henley. You're not just surviving anymore. You're ruling. I smiled at our reflection in the window. The three of us against the city, against the world, against anyone who thought a woman left in the snow would stay buried. The blizzard had tried to kill me. Instead, it had made me an empress. And empresses don't forgive. They reign. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe.